Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Although at the beginning of almost every podcast, I say that this is going to be our most exciting episode to date. It's going to be super true for what we're going to discuss today because we've been flirting with AI in previous episodes. And in fact, we've done more than a bit of flirting with AI. We actually went deep with how it applies to automating factories today. But today, it's going to be all about AI, all about a very special use case, all about a tool that can, in and of itself, transform the way you manufacture bulk liquids and the way you run factories in general. I don't think I'm exaggerating, but you guys, you'll have to stop me. I'm welcoming Eugene and Konstantin Paradisov again to the set. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Zen.
I tend to get super excited when we talk about AI and new technology and little pieces of little tools that can go a long way when it comes to transforming operations and digitalizing everything. So with that out of the way, I'm going to introduce the topic. It is going to be a chatbot, which is an experiment. The experiment itself is in quite an advanced stage. It's being tested by production operators. It's constantly evolving, and we're getting more and more feedback and more data into the system. So all in all, it's in a very exciting phase, and I'm ready to dive into it. Right, gentlemen? So let's just kick it off with what is a UNS chatbot and why are you building one?
Just to give you a quick background for this, because many of the listeners might not be familiar with what UNS is. We're talking about the manufacturing industry, and people have been trying to get more value and more information out of their machinery and equipment for many, many years. Many companies saw the successes of Amazon and Tesla with digital transformation and decided to invest into digital transformation strategy and digitalize all of their processes and their information. And so in that journey, they got to use industrial Internet of Things, where you have the sensors at the factory that provide real-time telemetry data to the system. And conventionally, that information is stored so that you can analyze it later. But unified namespace is something that brings a way to integrate all these different sources of data and all these different systems and give you the ability to have a version of the truth of what's going on in real time at your factory right now. And so when we were experimenting with the chatbot technology before we discovered the beauty of UNS, we were looking at how that could help us with our MES modules and with our offering. And then we saw that you can actually make this available to a much broader audience by having the integration with the unified namespace, where your chatbot could serve any operators, QC technicians, any other shop floor personnel, to give them information about what's happening right now in real time, as well as historical information. So as we think about these companies that are investing in getting more digital, they are the ones that are able to then reap the benefits of this kind of technology. And we're encouraging all the other ones that are still running on paper or in Excel to invest into digitizing their processes so that they can then use whatever they digitized as sources of data that go into the unified namespace. And then they can use this kind of exciting technology to talk to their unified namespace. So that's what this is all about.
Great. So what type of data are we working with? What can the UNS chatbot talk to?
Well, the good thing about the UNS chatbot is that it's really not constricted or constrained by anything. It can talk to all of the data that's available in the UNS. It can be data from edge telemetry, like Konstantin said, from all kinds of sensors and devices that are out there. It can also be data that's generated from other systems and also pumped into UNS. That could be customer orders, for example. It could be things like quality samples, right? So if you have something that's being sampled while the product is being made, the chatbot can see that and provide valid and useful input to the operator, for example, or to the QC technician, like Konstantin mentioned. Potentially, you can also have customer feedback, for example, right, or complaints. If you're making an order for a customer that recently, for example, had some kind of a issue, you may want to flag that to the operators, for example, right? So that they don't make the same mistake that they made last time, and potentially incentivize people to have better processes and make improvements right on the spot to make sure that issues that have come up before do not come up again. So really, the chatbot is basically able to take all the data that's available in UNS and then some and bring it all together, analyze it, and provide it to you whenever you request anything in a useful, verifiable, and valid fashion.
For those of us who are familiar with AI tools such as Copilots or ChatGPT, how is the UNS chatbot different?
Normally, a copilot would talk to the static data. So we have the notion of knowledge base, and knowledge base is all of your documents, whether it's PDF documents or in any other format that you were able to preload in advance. That's what your typical copilots are able to deliver. So whenever you have standard knowledge base, you've had time to clean up and process everything and load it in the right format, then you can ask a copilot that will look up this information and give you some general answers about it. And that's the majority of copilots. What we're talking about here is a hybrid. So we have the blend of the two approaches, with one of which is this knowledge base, where we're able to have information from user manuals, standard operating procedures loaded that is relevant for specific equipment, specific machinery in production lines at a factory. And that will give you troubleshooting information, any specific procedures on how to start up the equipment, how to shut it down, things like that. It's general knowledge about how that piece of machinery works. But the important part here is we also have a full context awareness. So the chatbot is not a typical copilot in the sense that it just sits there and gives you answers based on the knowledge base that it has preloaded, but it actually knows in real time what's going on your production lines. So there's technology behind the scenes that takes care of this. And so we have these two major sources of information. One is the knowledge base, one is the real-time data feed. And from there, we're able to then provide a lot more value to the operators on the shop floor. So perfect example is when you have an operator coming at the beginning of a shift and maybe they're unsure, maybe the information wasn't shared the best way it could have been shared between the outgoing shift and the incoming shift. And so they just have a question. But during the day in these facilities, there's usually somebody else that you can ask. Hey, Joe, did we load this into the reactor or whatever happened there? And there will be that Joe who can answer that question. But in 24/7 production facilities, when you're operating at night, the factory will have the minimal staff present. So there might not be anybody to ask. And then the operator can ask the chatbot, and the chatbot will know what is the current state of execution on that particular job that you're interested in, and will be able to tell you what's been done so far and what's expected to be done next. So that's immense value in terms of shift changeover, general operator training, So that's what makes it different. It's context awareness all the time of what's going on.
And so if I log in to the UNS chatbot, is it going to look similar to my chat GPT or to my Copilot?
So the user interface of the chatbot was initially very similar to how the conventional Copilots and ChatGPT and others treat the user interface. So it was very, very familiar to anyone who saw one before. However, we quickly realized that there are some improvements that could be made, because one of the biggest issues, for example, in manufacturing, is the language barrier. So many operators may not even be English speakers. They may have other languages as their main language, for example, Spanish. They could be not fast typers, or maybe not the greatest spellers of English language. All those things together, they might present a barrier for the operator to actually willingly and effectively use such a chatbot. With that in mind, we thought we should add voice prompting so that people can actually talk to chatbot, and not only talk to chatbot in English, but potentially talk to chatbot in other languages, such as Spanish, again, for example, because there are a lot of Spanish-speaking people in our country, and other languages too. But the main point is that the current AI that we are able to utilize in our technology is capable of understanding different languages, even through voice prompting, right? So we can voice prompt, it will transcribe and understand what's being asked, and then use all the information that it has. What Konstantin said before, the context-aware information, not just static stuff, but also what's going on in real time right now, and provide answers to the operators in the language that they easily understand. So that is the most exciting piece that we have in our technology, that we don't just look exactly the same as everybody else, but we have this additional technology that allows the operator to use their own language and potentially to use the voice prompt if that is more preferable.
Just to add on the voice prompting part, I would say that we've been lucky to collect real feedback from real production operators and see how they would use this kind of stuff in their work environment. People don't think about it, but when we talk like this, obviously we're not sitting at a factory, but there's a lot of factories that have high level of noise when they work. And it might be noise from any machinery, any equipment, and there might also be several people co-located in the same room where they're controlling the equipment. So if they have a shared control room, then you would have that situation. And so when we look at the design of the chatbot and the voice prompting feature, it's important to recognize how is it going to be used by real operators on the ground. And can we just make it something like Amazon Alexa, where it just listens to everything that's going on? The answer is no, because there's so much noise. Alexa would go nuts, right? So when we developed this technology, we actually had those production operators in mind, and we had to make easy ways for them to access, but only listen when they mean for this technology to listen to them. It's very specific, because otherwise there's a lot of noise. You would trigger all your microphones all the time. This is important. And so they can say something and the technology understands better from what they said, what they wanted, as opposed to from what they could type. So yes, that's a one exciting opportunity there with the language barriers and being able to deliver something to people that makes it exciting for them and makes it easy to use.
Speaking of sound and noises and the responses, how are the responses, so the output that I get from a UNS chatbot, how are they different from what I might be used to with other LLMs?
Again, the output, it's not an internet search, right? So we're not talking about our chatbot saying, oh, okay, let me go search on the internet what you are asking about. It's grounded, the responses are grounded in the knowledge base information and in the unified namespace information. So the information that's given to the chatbot is very specific. And we're trying to minimize any kind of random, unrelated ideas or conversations there so that LLM doesn't guide you down the path of a rabbit hole and doesn't go on the internet to search for something random, but it's using what it has been allowed to use, right? But then even when you ground the LLM responses in certain information, you might run into a situation where the operator asks a question about something relatively complicated. So we are dealing with food and beverage processing facilities, and there is processing equipment that has very detailed and nuanced startup and shutdown procedures, for example. And so when you ask a chatbot, how do I start this equipment right now? It will give you the response, and the response will have all the necessary steps. But there might be a bunch of text that makes the paragraph look busy, right? So what we heard from our clients was that the operators like easier ways of consuming information. And so one person at the factory said, well, text is nice, but how about you show pictures? And the light bulb went off in that there are different ways to integrate this kind of technology. We can take images from the user manuals and show them in the output. So when the chatbot responds to you, if you have images at your disposal that help understand that topic better, they will come up in the response. And we've tested that. It works great. The bot starts providing you, streaming that answer, and in that answer, there's an image that tells you this is what you do. If you want several images that outline a sequence of steps and show you how it's done, that's also a possibility. If you want a video clip embedded, we can give you a video clip. So there are these wonderful opportunities to make the response more easy to use for the operators that don't want to read an article. So like that's the one thing that we understood from the feedback of real production operators is that nobody wants to get this kind of huge thing to read in a response. They want something short.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Konstantin, you briefly mentioned this chatbot not searching the internet and therefore having less hallucinations. How are you approaching that problem? Because you are building on an LLM, and one of the biggest problems currently with the chatbots that we have is hallucination. So have you gotten a grip on that? How is it performing in the tests?
Good question. With any new technologies, there will always be room for improvement. So we just got to get that out of the way, that there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. But with all that, we're able to give the LLMs a certain set of rules by which to play and a certain set of specific directions to say that whatever you're going to come back with needs to follow this set of rules. And so from that perspective, we haven't had issues with hallucination yet because you can make the rules of the game so specific and so strict as to how you want your output to be these days. It's not a free flow conversation. So that is not an issue. Maybe it will come up. So for that to be able to answer this question with great certainty, you can't just run a few tests and say, oh yeah, the model doesn't hallucinate. What you have to do is pretty much run a comprehensive benchmarking effort, or you do this testing. So that's where we get into using a specific conceptual framework on how we can test this to make sure that a good deal of the time, this chatbot produces correct responses. And then from there, you look at in the times that it didn't produce the correct responses. First of all, is that frequent or is that not frequent? And what kind of responses did it produce? So far, what we're seeing, most of the time when it doesn't produce the right response, it's not hallucination. It's specifics and trickery of the underlying mechanism in finding the right information. So when in test environment it says something that's not correct, it's usually, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have enough information to answer that question. So it's good. It's good in the sense that it doesn't lead you down the wrong path. It just says it doesn't have enough information. However, in those cases, we also know that the technology could be improved a little bit because we know that the answer is in that data. It's just harder to find. So this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of the underlying mechanisms, because there are certain things that the LLMs prefer. And we are trying to bury the answer in the test data in different ways, in different places of the data. And we see that if it's buried in a particular spot, sometimes the LLM might miss it. So it's that issue that we're working on. How do you make the data that you present to LLM, how do you put it in the most consumable way for the LLM to give you the right answer most of the time? It's not that it's just going to give you a bogus answer. It's that it's probably not going to see it, and it's going to tell you, okay, then I don't know what the answer to this is. And you're like, yeah, but you could have. And so that's what we're working on. It's not the issue of just going completely down the wrong path. That's pretty manageable, I would say, because of how you structure the tasks that the LLM has to work with. And so, yeah, that's an exciting area of research for us. It's basically what you see on your interface as a user. Like, I asked this question, the chatbot responded with this. It's not really what's going on overall in the background if you looked at the communication with the AI model. There's a lot more communication that you don't see, where we tell it the rules of the game. So do this and don't do that. That's how this works, that you don't run into that issue of going down a completely wrong path.
Makes sense. And in some ways, I wish more of the public LLMs function this way, that they would just admit that this is all the information I have, or I need more information, because they don't. Well, the newer models do, actually. So I've gotten responses like that saying, I don't know. And I need more information to be able to answer this. So,
by the way, just since you mentioned that, we make this technology very flexible and configurable. So when you go into the settings of the chatbot, you can tell it which model you want to use. So if you want to use Google's model, fine, go to Google's model. If you want to use OpenAI directly, you can use OpenAI directly. If you want to use OpenAI through Microsoft, through Azure, you can do that. What I'm trying to say, it's not which model you use, although that plays, of course, an important role, but it's what instructions you give it that the user doesn't see when the user asks a question. There's a lot more going on in the background than what the user sees in front of them. And that background issuing of instructions to the large language model is what prevents the hallucination. There's basically somebody whispering in the large language model's ear, don't do this, don't do that, only respond this way. And so when you ask something, it's like, okay, the large language model just got all these rules of the game, and they keep coming. They don't just get sent in the very beginning and that's it. So that's what happens. That's how you prevent the ridiculous responses. And we constantly tell it, if you don't know, just say, I don't know. That's part of it, because then you prevent wrong product from being made.
So regarding training materials, how does having such a chatbot help with user training, and does it make the operators dumber?
Definitely not. The chatbot is very useful and very valuable tool, but it doesn't do everything for you, and it definitely does not make anybody dumber. What it does, in fact, it helps educating the operators. It helps training them on the spot, on the job, right when the training or help is needed, which is the most valuable way to train people. If you know about training, it's very easy to go to training, train for 5 days, and then forget all about what you've just learned, right? Because you didn't apply it. You just did something in a class or in some kind of call. Helping a person do something right when they need to do it provides very valuable training. The outcome of that training is that the new material or the new way of doing things that the person just learned, they are very well acclimated into the person, and they know now. They don't have to go and relearn it most of the time. they now know it for life, they will continue using that approach going forward. The operators just basically become more and more trained after interacting with such a chatbot. In addition to that, we also invite very good, heavy skepticism from the operators so that we get information from them. We encourage them to challenge the tool, challenge the chatbot, because that provides us with valuable input as well. So them, meaning operators interfacing with the chatbot, helps us learn about the tool and helps us think of ways to improve it, the chatbot and the underlying technology even further to make it even more useful. There could be situations, and I think Konstantin mentioned it in another question that we've discussed, that there could be a night shift where the operator cannot ask somebody else for a helping hand, right? And say, oh, did you do that? Or did you do that? Or how do I do this? In the night shifts usually are run by a very small skeleton crew that is not, people reach. It's just a few people here and there, and in such environments it's very useful to have somebody like this or something like this, like a chatbot, where you can just quickly ask for a helping hand, like what do I do now, or how do I do this, and all of a sudden you get an answer and you continue on your way. This is very valuable in such situations, and not only that, you continue on your way, you now have learned how to do this going forward right when you needed it.
Can we summarize historical trends of the data? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so we're working on integrating third-party historians into the chatbot. And I'll tell you, yes, there have been successful test results. That's the short answer. The challenge here is when you try to make something universal like this, you run into this issue that's prevalent everywhere in manufacturing, where the naming of specific data points or tags in the historians has been historically very cryptic. And so poorly named tags from a perspective of just plain English language and understanding lead to this problem of the large language model not understanding what data points to select when you're asking the question in plain English. So think about this. If you just as yourself, as a human, were asked, give me the historical trend in the last week in temperature for this particular piece of equipment, for that sensor, you would then look for temperature, right? But if in the historian, the temperature reading is not called temperature, it might be a T. And in front of that T, there might be some prefix that the engineer back in the day decided that it was cool to separate it out by putting some abbreviated naming of what that temperature sensor relates to, right? So you end up with a bunch of characters and then some underscore T or something like that at the end, or temp. But temp might be also confused with temporary variables, so when you just look at it as a person and you don't know any specifics about that thing. So that's a challenge, right? And so now we're saying to the large language model, here's the user question or user query. Find me the right information from the historical trends. The trick here is if you're only working with your own ecosystem, then you know what all the things are. If you're working with a more universal product offering where people could load whatever they want and say, yeah, here's my historical data, so I'm going to start asking questions. Then you have to have some kind of layer of translation of what all those cryptic names mean. And that's the part that we're working on, because depending on how much information is available about every single thing, you could get the right answer, you could get no answer, like, I don't know what this is, So yes, we've had successful tests with that specific use case where we're able to pull historical data out of the historian, with the caveat that the name of what we were asking for was recognizable. So I'll give you an example. When you ask for something like OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, and you see how that type of information is stored, you will usually have the 3 letters OEE in there. And they're pretty unique together in that you don't see the appearance of those letters in other words in English in other fields. So if you see OEE, it's most likely OEE related. But there are some other ones, like I mentioned with temperature or something else, where you just might not know that that's what it is. And so you have to absolutely figure out, okay, how, if we're offering this to be configurable, and work with third-party historians, and we don't know ahead of time what they're going to load in there, there has to be a mechanism to look this up. But it's definitely an active area of research and work to bridge the gap there. The cryptic names are everywhere in the industry, and there are services that deal with this. So we have a very good feeling about this.
Okay, and can you talk about some of the main challenges when it comes to making such a chatbot work properly?
Well, let's see. One of the main challenges, I guess, would be to deal with the volume of data that the plant generates. So we have to do it in a very calculated way. We have to make sure that we filter the data properly before submitting it for analysis for the AI, making sure that we don't overwhelm anything, because obviously you have limitations as to how much data LLM can process effectively. So that would be the challenge. We absolutely have to filter the data for LLM to analyze it successfully. We have to make sure that we use special technologies underlying all the technology that we make, such as vector searches and in-memory databases, to make sure that it's the most efficient way to provide the data, and to ensure that we do not provide too much data, which makes it either not working at all or not effective at what it's trying to do. So I would say that that's probably one of the biggest concerns is the volume of data, especially when you're talking about data that's generated by edge devices, such as all kinds of sensors and equipment. They may be like generating with frequencies of multiple data points per second. So you will end up with a lot of data. So obviously, you have to be very careful as to how you present that to the AI models to make sure you get the most effective answer out of it.
That's probably one of the most fascinating parts of this entire discussion for a lot of us.
Yeah, and think about this. As these models get better, we keep finding out every few months that so-and-so's company, whether it's Google, OpenAI, or Claude from Anthropic, they can now process more data. So they talk about this context window. So bigger context window, more tokens translates to more words, more characters, right? When you think about the data that you have in real time at a factory, you can easily surpass all the context window limitations. So it's never a good strategy to say, I'm going to just take everything, send it to the large language model, and ask my question. And even if you could, because in some cases you can say, well, I'm not integrating everything yet, right? So not all my data sources are connected. So in the absence of all data sources being connected, and maybe I have only 2 or 3 things integrated, can I send everything? Even in that case, when it fits the context window and all that information fits, you run into a different problem. The large language models tend to lose minute detail, just like humans would. When you send them too much data, and there's that one little thing somewhere towards the end, that little detail. And then you ask a question about that little detail, and they're like, yeah, I don't know. So what you then have to do, even if it fits, still go back to what Eugene said and filter the data that you provide to the LLM for relevancy. And how you filter it, that's the whole trick of the game here, because there are many different suggestions floating out there on the web with RAG, retrieval augmentation generation, and all that. It's all nice in concept, but until you actually try to do it with real-time telemetry data that's changing every second, you don't know what you're talking about when you're talking about those concepts. So it changes people's understanding of the complexity of this very quickly, because I could ask a question from the chatbot that if I asked it from a database, the database would do a full table scan all your data and find your answer. Now, think about that. If just the question itself forces that to be the case, how are we going to find that information and make sure that we provide all the relevant data to the large language model? So there are challenges in this. And what you do when the user asks a question in terms of filtering the data, I think that's going to be key as this technology keeps developing and going into the future. So we're excited about the opportunities there, and we've had some good successes on that front.
One of the things that come up in these conversations about chatbots and LLMs is the reliability. So how can you test that, and how do you know it's telling the truth, or to what degree it's telling the truth?
Yeah, so we're working on that part in terms of utilizing the conceptual framework of end-to-end testing, which basically means that you have to assemble these data sets where you know in advance what the answer is. You have the data set, you have your golden answer, and then you just replicate that so that there's a lot of those, and you run this in some kind of automation in a script where the chatbot is asked the question and it provides the answer. You collect all the answers and you compare those answers to what was the golden answer known ahead of time. And there are different ways of comparing. You can do it by hand, you can automate it, depends on how much data you have. But basically what you want to do at the end is see where you were off and hone in on that data and see why you were off. And were you off, like you mentioned earlier in this podcast, were you off because the model was hallucinating and just spitting out some garbage? Or were you off just because it said that it didn't know? But basically, there is a framework that's called end-to-end testing with this, where you have to do a lot of tests with the answers that you know ahead of time. You bury the right information in the data set. You know what it should look like. And then you can see whether the chatbot spit out the answer you expected or not. And then you tally this up and say, yeah, 80% of the time it produces the right answer. So right now we're doing that manually, so we're not ready to reveal the percentages yet. But yeah, it's something that we're actively working on, because I totally expect any manufacturer to ask that question. So yeah, and again, it will differ between setups, because we can tell you that 80% of the time or 90% of the time this produces an accurate answer. That will depend on all the configuration parameters that are in a particular deployment, right? If we say that this is so flexible that you can choose whichever model you want, you can provide your own data. So the integration matters in this regard. So if you just have a basic setup and your data has a lot of cryptic stuff, but there is no dictionary, so to speak, that could translate all your cryptic information into human readable information, then you're probably going to get a lot of I don't know answers. So this is something where we would work together with the client, whoever chooses to deploy such a solution, and explain to them, this is what you're getting out of the box, but you need to be mindful of what data you're feeding it. Would you, as a person yourself, recognize the data that you're feeding? Do you know what all these things mean? And if not, probably the chatbot will also not recognize it. So there needs to be very careful management of the data sources.
Yeah. And you've talked a bunch about, what's coming up and what lies ahead, but can you give us an idea of the main things that are on the roadmap for you? So what improvements are you seeing as a must?
We're looking into ease of use first, so going back to having kicked the tires with the different iterations of the chatbot with the real users, with potential users, when they provide feedback, we listen to that feedback, we go back and make the interface easier for them to use. So that was your feedback about languages, and we saw that some couldn't type very well. That was your feedback about showing images. All of this, like the way the data is presented, is curated towards the end users in the manufacturing space. So we're going to continue to invest into that. That's first. And voice input, text to speech, all of that stuff. But in addition, we have other things that are in the works, like role-based access control and shift handoff mode. So you want to be able to say, for the shift, how do you present this consistently? Like help not just answer questions of what do I do next, because that we've covered. The chatbot is pretty good at answering that question when it has the production recipes and it's able to guide the operators through execution. But also just come up with some kind of standardized way of presenting that information. Then if they want to say, hey, how about a certain dashboard view when they ask the questions? So there are ways to integrate outside dashboards into this so that you're not only spit out images and videos in your chat messages and your responses from the bot, but you are able to bring up dashboard views right away during the conversation and have performance summaries. And then the long-term item on the roadmap is learning from the data with machine learning, because we have two things going on. We have data retention on the chats themselves, and that's something that a customer would control, how much data they want to retain for their audits, for compliance reasons. And also, we have the data itself that's in the historian, and you can use the telemetry data, the work order data, the customer order, the customer complaints, that feedback stuff. You can use all of that to extrapolate information from that. And so the machine learning is on the roadmap. But one thing I wanted to point out, something that sort of came up very quickly, is that because the nature of developing AI solutions is experimental, there is no book that tells you how you should design a chatbot. You end up trying a lot of different ideas and selecting the best ones, but sometimes you don't know if something is the best idea or not. And we ran into this where something looks like it could be good, but not in every situation. So what we understood with this, and I think this is going to be big going forward with the chatbot configuration, is that you need to be able to have multiple pipelines. What I mean by this is I can save a certain configuration of the chatbot that when the user asks a question, does X, Y, and Z. And it goes maybe to Google's model to ask for one thing, and it goes to OpenAI model to ask for another thing in that process. But then I say, okay, this is good for certain applications, but maybe I want to do slightly different things when I have a different use case. And I want to be able to switch between these quickly and compare which one is best. And so we already have that going on right now, where you can select the pipeline that you want to work with, and we call them stations. So you can create as many stations as you want, and you say this station works this way and that station works that way. But then as we were working on catering to those different configuration possibilities, we realized that it would be great to actually bring in a workflow management interface into this, so that the users who are more advanced can actually go in and configure their own workflows, saying the message comes in, this is how I want it handled, and you can tweak and configure what happens in between before the chatbot gives you the response. We're already starting to work on that, because there are exciting opportunities there, and this kind of technology becomes more and more accessible every day. So we think that in the future, again, our focus is on making this applicable to as many manufacturers as possible. So we want it to be ultimately configurable to not depend on any one particular MES solution, any one particular ecosystem. And so for that configurability, we are going to bring in the workflows so that you can use that visual interface and say, yeah, when this happens, this is what I want to do. And there will be people who will jump onto that. So that's exciting.
The people who are going to jump on this, they will first have to demo it. Are you doing demos right now? How can people see this technology in action?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we are preparing for a big event that we would like to invite everybody who would like to come and see our technology in action, and plenty of other things to see. And that is Prove It conference that will take place in Dallas, Texas. It will take place in February, between the 18th and the 20th of February. There will be 3 days, 18th, 19th, and 20th, that anybody who is interested, it would be a great opportunity to come and visit us, learn more about the whole unified namespace and digital transformation, and the Industry 4.0 approach to the future of manufacturing. The man behind it is Walker Reynolds and 4.0 Solutions. They are the organizers of this conference. They are the leading force behind the UNS. So it will be our honor to be in the same conference with them. It should be a great event, and we can't wait to see you all there.
Yeah, people will be able to walk up to our booth and ask questions from the chatbot. And yes, there will be people who will be coming up with all sorts of impossible questions, and we invite that. Come with all your impossible questions and we'll let you ask them.
I'll tell you a common question that will be typed into that demo. It's going to be...
You don't even need to type it. You can just ask it.
Oh, or you can ask it. I would guess a lot of people who are interested in this would walk up to it and say, UNS Chatbot, how much do you cost? And how long does it take to implement you?
That's a good one.
We're going to provide more information at the conference. I will reveal some information here, but we also want people to come to the conference to see it. So we're trying to make this as affordable as possible. And the base package is going to be $5,000 a year subscription, $5,000. And that, for manufacturers, should be very affordable. It's a no-brainer. If you're a plant manager and you're thinking that you want to try this and you have at least something already digitized in terms of the data that you're going to be able to send, then this would be very easy for you to jump into. I was on a call with one of the potential customers, and the question was about this kind of stuff, like what can we load into this? And you can load anything. So whether you're talking about work orders, quality lab information like sanitation data, clear in place data, all of this can be there. The one little caveat is that that information needs to be available digitally, right? So if you're one of those manufacturers that has everything on paper, this is a perfect conference for you to come to, because you will see a lot of different options for how you can choose to get off of that paper and get information digitized. But I would say most of the manufacturers are probably in a situation where they have something on paper in Excel and something digitized. So even there, you have opportunities. And we are starting with the $5,000 a year base package, and then we're going to provide more details about the integration services. So those companies that want their integration to happen faster will be able to get our help with the integration, but it's optional.
And if we were to implement this for a plant, what kind of timeline are we looking at?
Well, the timeline for a basic installation, we would think about 4 to 5 weeks. That should get you going. But of course, that depends on how ready you are with what Konstantin mentioned as far as digitizing everything that you have. If you already have it in a digital form, great. Then you can definitely enjoy a shorter timeline and get things going faster. However, in reality, there might not be 4 or 5 weeks because you're not ready yet and you have to do some other things to make the information available. So you have to factor that in. In some cases, integration may take longer, like I said, with depending on how ready the company is, and it could potentially take like a 16-week timeline to do a full implementation. But it really depends on the availability of the data at the company, how suitable it is to be fed into the chatbot, and how fast the actual company can turn around, because implementation like this will require well coordinated work between the person setting up the chatbot and everybody else who can provide the data to make that chatbot as useful as it can be. So we will be discussing this at the conference, so it would be a great time to approach us and learn more about this. That's the answer, basically. It's possible to do it really quickly if you're ready, and if you want to go within like a 4 or 5 week timeline, it's possible. And then after that, it really depends on how ready you are, how ready the data is. That's why we're giving a 16-week timeline as an additional milestone to measure against. But yeah, that's about it.
And one final question, Konstantin and Eugene. I'm thinking if I were a plant manager, I would get mega excited at what we just talked about, but I would also want to know what else is out there. So can you talk about what else is out there in terms of chatbots and manufacturing systems?
As of today, there aren't many chatbots available for manufacturers to see yet, but there will be one additional solution of this kind at the Prove It conference. So we invite everyone to come to the conference and see it for themselves. You know, we're not saying that one is better than the other, even though you will see specific differences, but there will be a lot of fun experimentation and opportunities to learn more about what one solution does, what it doesn't do, and what the other one is good at. So I'm very excited for February, and we invite everybody to come and take a look.
One that we know of. There might be more. Who knows?
Yes, very important caveat. Maybe there's going to be another one that people build, but we think that when people look at solutions based on the merits, they can make their own determination. They can weigh the value, the bang for the buck, so to speak, that they get, and decide what they want to move forward with. So we're very excited about this.
And by the way, we also provide a very sophisticated MES system for our clients, and our chatbot can work with that and make wonders out of the data that comes out of that. But it doesn't have to.
Eugene, thank you for bringing that up, because this is important when people try to understand how long we've been working on this technology and where we as Eukodyne came from. It's important to note that we've been developing manufacturing execution systems for many years in the food and beverage industry. And the idea of the chatbot came up whenever the LLM revolution happened with the ChatGPT, right? Whenever that came out. And initially, we were working on building this solution just within our own ecosystem. So that's how we were able to test this and know that we can actually look at production recipes and answer the question of what do I do next? And this whole 100% context awareness, that's not new to us. That has been in the works for a long time. So we then started working with Walker Reynolds and 4.0 Solutions in the context of their Digital Mastermind program. And that's where the idea came to try to bring this into the world of the unified namespace. And so that's why we're now excited and confident that this will be the best strategy going forward, because we're able to open up this kind of solution to a much, much broader audience. We're not locking in anybody to just our manufacturing execution systems. Even though those for whom it's a good fit, they're welcome to take a look at them, and we'll have more information about that at the conference.
Thank you so much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking around to this mega episode on the new UNS Chatbot coming out by Eukodyne. And I think this is an episode which, if we were to redo this in a month's time, it would be totally new because of the pace of how fast you're developing and building this solution. So this is an exciting space to watch. I think it might not be an exaggeration to say that maybe chatbots are going to be the killer application that are going to transform manufacturing plants to go digital. And we'll see what the future holds. Stick around for the upcoming episodes of the Efficiency Equation. And with that, we are out.
Thank you.